my topic. It's one of those times when I find myself formulating what I want to say and realizing uh, um, that I have your permission and my permission to not have a completely designed thought, but rather I'm entering into a world and I want to share that world with you. So just to retrace a few steps from last time and what the week of contemplation and study has been for me. Um, when I the fact that Christmas and Hanukkah fell on this day, I was brought into uh, two thoughts. One is I think the awful way that Hanukkah was taught when I was a kid. And when I was a kid, Hanukkah was taught as Judah Maccabee is Thomas Jefferson. He fought for freedom of thought, as opposed to the awful Syrian Hellenists, which were voices of authoritarianism. I mean, it clearly was Jewish thought in the 1950s and 60s, responding to the Jewish identification with the project of the liberal state, and probably still responding to the authoritarian voices in World War II, um, uh, um, Nazi Germany, Soviet Union, maybe even authoritarian voices here in America. But clearly, as I reflected on it, it was taking the holiday and using what we were going through as an affirmation and a reflection of what we were going through. And so what actually happened during the time, meaning what is described in the book of the Maccabees, was never taught. So I went and studied, of course, discovered Kabbalah and Hasidism. And in Kabbalah and Hasidism, they put the history aside for a moment and devoted the thought to the symbol of the ner, of the lamp, of the candle. They looked at the Torah portion where we have the ner and the candle, and whoever wrote these things, rooted in the Midrash, a deep meditation on the nature of the candle, the idea that that light is drawn out of a deep region that does not appear to be lit. For example, the oil in an oil lamp. The wick is that which draws it out. The light that is produced, and some other light that has to be drawn down to light the wick. And some very beautiful imagery. The Hasidic tradition identified the oil with the soul, that the soul is dark, somewhat unseen. We don't feel its light, and there's an active will to light the wick. And for me, that somewhat stands for the idea of Hanukkah is when your life doesn't have light, at least light the wick. And I've met many people when they've reached out to me to study with me or counsel, they say their life lacks light. They don't feel life is meaningful. They feel lost. They live in a darkened world. And the question is, do you have enough will to light the wick? The wick goes down into the soul, and then the soul, as it were, emits its light. And what comes out of that is a Torah, obviously going from the verse in Proverbs, ner mitzvah the Torah or the ner, the candle, as it were, is the mitzvah, and the Torah is the or, the teaching is the light. So what is the mitzvah? The mitzvah is to light the light in moments of darkness and allow the soul to show its light. But the soul cannot show its light until you bring just enough to light the light and allow the soul. So look at all the things that I have to, as it were, believe. I have to believe I have a soul. I have to believe that times of darkness can be conquered by the light of the soul, at least to some degree. The idea of the minimum will that is needed, but a focused will to light the light, whatever that symbol means. So as I restudied it, I saw either I can think that that Judah Maccabee is Thomas Jefferson, and we're fighting for the right to liberal state, which I already knew that that's what I believed. And then the spiritual meaning, I turned it to myself. I remember studying this in my, I guess, my 20s, and I certainly suffered then from considerable periods of darkness. The darkness is still there. It's less painful and less frequent, but it's still there. And this idea of just feeling the darkness, not avoiding the darkness, knowing the darkness, and then knowing that process of there's a moment in the darkness when there will be some deed, some thought, feeling, behavior, action, word, something in the world where I can say or do something that is the mitzvah that lights the wick, that brings the oil up, and it turns into a Torah, the Torah meaning the teaching, and things shift. So this idea of what Rudolf Bultmann calls demythologizing takes out the miracle of the not enough oil for the 8 days. It's a nice myth. I think there's a lot there, but I remember when I was in Hebrew school that we taught, well, the oil lasted for 8 days, and I remember thinking, okay, I mean, I've heard miracle stories before. I didn't, I so didn't believe it that I didn't even reject it. I just thought, well, this is what people do. They just make up these stories. It's okay, I'm not mad about it. And then Thomas Jefferson. And but nothing like this. Nothing like, well, let's look at the symbol, forget about the miracle. Let's look at the symbol, meaning miracle or not, what's behind the miracle is the symbol of the candle, the oil, the light, etc. So I thought about Bultmann's idea, a great Protestant theologian. I'll talk about him in just for a moment again. That if we forget about the miracle, which for some people is the meaning of the religion, and for other people is what actually pushes away, because people say, I don't believe in miracles. And I remember very early on, having studied Bultmann, I remember a truth that I learned, which is the miracle makes no difference, is the meaning of the miracle. And I invented a little analogy I think I've shared with you many times, but may have some newcomers. And my analogy is that the gods of Egypt were upset because Pharaoh was not putting enough salt in the sacrifice, and they decided he keeps doing it over and over again. He's a little inattentive about this. He doesn't know that we really want precision. How do we humiliate Pharaoh and get him to listen to us? And he says, well, you guys, I have an idea. Those Israelite slaves, let's actually get them out. He's going to chase them, and then we can collapse the water on his army and humiliate him to these slaves, and then he'll learn to listen to us. And they confer and say, okay, that's a great idea. So they conspire this whole Exodus story, which is actually simply a way for Egyptian gods to humiliate Pharaoh. Now, if you're there with the video camera, you wouldn't know what the miracle meant. Is it the God of Israel taking the Israelites out of Egypt and redeeming them from Pharaoh? Or is it the God of Pharaoh humiliating Pharaoh? You could look at the miracle and of the parting of the Red Sea, and you would not know what it meant. So the only reason the parting of the Red Sea is important is the meaning behind it, not the miracle itself. So in that way, what Bultmann said for people resisting Christianity, especially the virgin birth, said, forget about it. Like, what does it mean? And the question is, can the meaning be there without the miracle? Just take your eyes off the miracle. As I wrote my Shabbat thought last week, miracles are glitzy, but the meaning behind it is where the power is, where the energy is. So I talked a bit about the so-called myth of the virgin birth. And again, I want to remind you, myth does not mean not true. Myth means some kind of orienting narrative that orients us toward a life of meaning. So when reading Rudolf Bultmann in his work on mythologizing, which means helping us not put so much attention into a myth as something we don't believe in, but rather a myth as something that articulates a deeper reality. So this is part of Bultmann, and he was a great, in my mind, the greatest interpreter of Christianity. He looms very large in my life. And so Rudolf Bultmann's project was the following. During the 19th century, when people began to understand where texts came from, say where the New Testament came from, where the Gospels came from, that there were many other Gospels that did not make it into the New Testament, understanding the letters of Paul as being situated at a certain point in history, it lost some of its magic. It lost some of its mystical allure as the Word of God. And many Protestants, this was a this was mainly a Protestant project, the theology, but I'm assuming Catholics as well, just distance themselves from religion. They would go to church and they would hear things that they don't believe, that didn't speak to them, and it was either you believe this is the very word of God or you don't, and if you don't belong here. What happened is Christianity, some parts of Protestant Christianity turned into social ethics. In fact, my doctoral degree, which is in religion social ethics, was originally a divinity. USC was a divinity school for this exact kind of Protestantism, which means the meaning of Protestantism was social engagement. We would say social action. We would say tikkun olam. In the 1950s, when the religion department was founded, they decided to have it not be a divinity school, but rather a school for the actual study of religion and social ethics and the connection between them. So Bultmann saw this and he said, this is terrible for two reasons. Number one, it takes people away from the depth that a demythologized Christianity can't offer people. There is something there that's transformative. It's something that people need because they need something that attaches to their soul, something transformative. And the price of admission is not believing in a miracle. The price of admission is allowing its depth to reach out to you. Now, I think he was prescient in some ways because the crisis of Germany in the 1930s was there's no belief system. And the belief system that came in, it didn't have to push out a rigorous and compelling Christianity that captures people's souls. It was a weak. It was something of a hollow shell, making space for truly destructive beliefs to come in because people have a natural need to believe things strongly. As you know, that's one of my interpretations of how DEI and neo-Marxism and postmodernism and anti-colonialism, hatred of Israel, how did it succeed so much in a place of academic of the academy where people are actually supposed to think and analyze? The problem was people didn't believe in anything. They weren't motivated. They didn't have any passion. So something comes in that's filled with passion and a pre-supplied evil belief, but it's a belief. And I look at these young people, have no idea what they're talking about, no idea what they're saying, but rattling off slogans, Palestine free, and not even know where Palestine was and what river to what sea. It didn't matter. Why did it matter? Because more than anything, they wanted to believe something. I'm glad that I think, as I predicted, this thing is going to collapse. There's going to be a pushback in America, and there was a pushback. But the idea that when there is a hollowness, an absence of a not a mythic world, meaning believing in the supernatural, but a mythic world that we have orienting symbols and stories that are expressions of the soul. The soul needs symbols. The soul needs poetry. The soul needs myths, not to draw out of us exceeding the idea of the miracle, but as a way to orient the inner life. So Bultmann was writing to restore Christianity for those who could not be what we might call today fundamentals. I don't like the term, but it's an efficient term to say that people are attached to fundamentals connected to the supernatural. What we call orthodoxy. Many people use that as a kind of Jewish fundamentalism. Again, I don't like the term. I'm just describing something. And he wanted to be able to say there's depth, there's meaning here. It's an organization of symbols, of narratives that tell us about the human condition. And when you go to church, you don't just sit there and think, I don't believe this, but rather, what in this liturgy, what in this Bible speaks to me and helps me discover the contours of my soul. That's the what I don't think Bultmann put it that way, but that's the way that I would put it. Of course, that continued for me at that time in my critique of Reform Judaism. There was little talk of faith, and again, because faith was always faith in a miracle, faith in something I can't believe, as opposed to faith as a mode of consciousness, being connected to something metaphysical of justice, truth, and beauty. Faith in the idea of being faithful to a friend, a faithful friend, having, being a faithful friend, and feeling the faith of something else in you. So the words opened up for me the minute I took away from the idea that Maimonides had these 13 propositions. If you believed it, you were a good Jew, and if you didn't, you were not a good Jew. So that whole world of theological propositions went out for me. There's actually a term called non-propositional theology, which means the connection to the soul and to the divine is not about acceding to a set of propositions. And if you believe them, then you are a religious Jew. And if you don't, you're not. Threw propositional theology out the window. And the question for me was, how does this assemblage of myths and symbols and stories and teachings of some kind of, a cacophony into a symphony and address my soul and deepen me as a human being and connect other people? So reading Bultmann and others helped me orient my life in a way that for me has been profound and fulfilling my entire life. And then I looked at Reform Judaism, where it was all about Tikkun Olam, and it was ban the bomb and get out of Vietnam and civil rights, and those are all good things. I like to ban the bomb and get out of Vietnam and civil rights, but that's not religion. I mean, it's good. It's good to be invested um, in a liberal society to bring our rights, and privileges, and duties and responsibilities to a wider and wider population, and not have our nation engage in things that are in a way can ultimately destructive to our well-being. I believe that, but that's not what religion is. And what I think I shared with me in many ways that the beginning of Or Torah back in the early 1990s. Here was a rabbi at a synagogue where notable civil rights people were brought in. It was Israel, civil rights, doing good, doing justice. And when I gave my first talk on the inner life, again, I was overwhelmed with the amount of phone calls that I got. I remember those blue slips when they wrote when you got a message. I had a stack of them. It grew to be over 100 of people saying to me, "I'm the only one in this congregation who understood you. I need to meet with you. I need to talk to you." I thought to myself, I can't meet with 100 people. And so I was in charge of the Saturday morning minyan. I told everybody, uh, uh, come to the minyan, and that was the embryo of Or HaTorah. When I left Stephen Weiss Temple, a tiny number of people came with me, and here we are. It was great. So it was a great run from 1993 until the government shut us down in March 2020. But it was very powerful. Well, what motivated me was vote, think deeply, reflect morally, and vote. Go decide. But I'm not here to teach you how to vote. I might be here to teach you how to think well, but people who think well can come to different political conclusions. I'm fine with that. I've changed my mind over the years, I think, because I've learned to think better, but maybe I thought worse. But I'm not as concerned with that as the power of a spiritual system to heal the soul and make us better people in a spiritual sense, our moral character. So I'm interested in spiritual and moral character growth. Bring that into the election, bring that into your social action, and things will be inherently better. So that's what part of what I've stood for, and what our synagogue and community has stood for. So that's a little bit of my story of how this idea of Bultmann, he was addressing Protestant Christianity, and I took it into my addressing Reform Judaism. But of course, it's much deeper than that, because once you go on that path, then you are on the lookout for that which feeds the soul, for that which helps you work on your moral character, for that which, in a way, shifts your spiritual personality into a life of depth and meaning. So that's the first thing I wanted to say, is that was what was impelling me last week as I thought about Christmas and Rudolf Bultmann. Now, I want to give you an example of this. Many people say to me over the years, they say, I don't like the prayer book. I don't like to be scripted. And the prayers mean nothing to me. And I became very deeply involved in the Hasidic experience interpretation of Judaism, an interpretation that had enormous reverence for the prayer book, but had an unusual path into the prayer book, which I think is very much in this Bultmannian sense of uh, encounter the depth of the concepts. Don't get hung up on what you don't believe. I'll put that aside just for a moment. The other one is I'll talk maybe a few minutes more about this tonight. The idea of phenomenology, And phenomenology is the world is phenomena presenting themselves to us, and consciousness uh, uh, and addressing themselves to us, and our encountering the phenomena. But as Rabbi Manning said earlier, and we find in this poem, you have to be receptive to the phenomenon. And sometimes we have a lens of, well, I don't like this, or I hate this, or I agree with this, or this is silly. I mean, there's a lens in front that stops us from actually experiencing. I'm not talking about the natural world now, in the spiritual metaphysical world of values. We have a preset system that as it were defends us from what is coming toward us. So this phenomenological idea, let me bracket out my beliefs, and then you hold the word, such as the prayer book, and get rid of all my judgmentalism, because many people came at me with a tremendous degree of judgmentalism. I said, just suspend that. Husserl would say, bracket that. You don't know what the prayer book is until you clear your mind of all the judgmentalism. Just, there's something called the prayer book, but you don't know what it means. Let me make a case for something else, which means let the phenomenon of the prayers come toward you, and experiencing them without a lens of judgmentalism. Just let it come toward you and see what happens. So, as I began to, my encounter of the prayer book happened when I was here in Israel, at the Hebrew University, after my college degree. I had a very good college degree where we studied Bultmann. And, for me, the prayer book was, you go to services and the rabbi reads the Latin and we read the italics, and we go back and forth, responsive readings, and that was it. It never meant much to me. And I decided I wanted to enter into that world. So here's one phrase that was profound to me until this very day. In the early part of the morning service, we have a prayer for the soul that starts like this: Elohai neshama shnatatabi tohorahi, ata brata, ata yitzarta, ata nefachtabi. Just that line. Adonai Elohai, my God, Elai haneshama, the soul, shnatatabi, that you have given to me or placed within me, tohorahi, is pure. Ata brata, you created it. Ata yitzarta, you shaped it. Ata nefachtabi, and you blew it into me. So we pause there and just start with what I'm going to call a a phenomenological openness to the words, without preset beliefs, but rather an investigation into what the words mean, what kind of meanings the words hold, and dispense with what I think they mean, and allow myself to the meanings to address me. Now, this is a lot of these ideas I think are inherently Jewish in Hasidic Judaism, but Martin Heidegger, for all his sins, was a thinker that actually promoted this idea. They call it Heideggerian, Martin Heidegger, hermeneutics. Remember, hermeneutics is the study of interpretation. Well, Heidegger believed there's profound depth and wisdom in language itself, but we defend ourselves from experiencing language. Heidegger was very interested in myths and in poetry. Heidegger wrote small books called What is Poetry? What is Metaphysics? What is Thinking? And so in my studies of Heidegger, I had not yet read Being in Time. I read that actually much later. Was There was a Heidegger up to his book Being in Time, written about 1927. And then after that, Heidegger became very interested in hermeneutics, meaning the study of interpretation. And much it was based in encountering words, which is which is all we have to create meaning. And therefore, the way you experience language and words will create the nature of your inner life. And he said, let's draw back. All we have is language, so let's take language seriously. Some people call this the linguistic term. Just don't sit inside this thing called language. Step back as much as you can and examine language and examine words. So in my study of Elohai Nishama Shnatatabi Tohorahi, that's what I did. So I encountered the word Elohai. Whether I believe in God or not believe in God, let's assume there's something called Elohim, that there is something beyond me, that creates meaning in the universe. The universe is about something. This is the existentialist idea. I exist. Um, do I exist in a cold, heartless universe? Well, I have felt that. Or is there something that when I ensconce myself in this sense of I exist in a cold, heartless, meaningless universe as a way to get rid of anything standing in between me and the truth and just stay there and see if something arises when I look at the word Elohai. So when I read the word Elohai, my God, when I allow it to address me, the word begins to shape my consciousness. And then, standing in this dark, cold, meaningless universe, something began to brew within me. Something in me, because I'd created the space, is where I allowed it to form. Now, I could have come at it theologically. Well, of course there's God. I believe in God. I'm theologically committed to God. That's okay. But I would have never had that experience had I not started with, I have no presuppositions. I have no lens. I'm going to rid myself of every anterior thought and just be in I exist, right? And take all meanings out and just assert myself into that isolation. Then see what happens, and then examine the word Elohai. Well, what did my soul do? Did my soul say, "Oh, I don't believe in God," or did my soul actually allow the word to, as it were, go through my consciousness where I studied the word, and then descend into my soul and allow my soul to form a sense of meaning? So this is a wonderful idea that I saw in James Hillman and Jung, and in this tradition that I'm sharing with you. Meaning is, now this is my words reflecting the tradition, meaning is assembled in the soul. So when you come at the word with preset meanings, you never get to experience how meaning takes shape. And for me, it's almost physical of meaning taking shape and then, as it were, delivering itself up. But for me, this practice allows me to, as it were, being a witness to meaning developing, taking shape in myself and delivering itself up, which is always new and miraculous, as opposed to living in a world of set theologies. So that's why these terms, phenomenology, encounter the word. Existentialism, get rid of all anterior thoughts and take the responsibility for whatever comes next. Hermeneutics, the idea of interpreting worlds without a lens. So I remember that I I wiped the slate clean as much as one can, and just allowed the word to address me. Elohai, then the word neshama. Again, without looking in the dictionary, without saying, well, what does the Talmud say? Sometimes when I teach about neshama and nefesh, someone says, well, the Talmud says this and the Midrash says this. I said, well, just let it all go. Let it all go. We have a word neshama. It's from the word linshom, to breathe. And the myth is that God breathed into us, and then all the different ways that the word is used in the Bible, many contradictory. Just let's just say encounter the word and how it's used, and not say that, well, the Talmud taught us what it means. The Midrash taught it what it means. I read a book that defines what it means. I just know that the word is there and is used in a certain way, sometimes contradictory. Let me just read these verses where the word is used and encounter them as much as I can without the lens of a tradition, but rather my consciousness, as it were, encountering, it's a Hasidic idea, the consciousness in the word, that is now and address me. By the way, this is a very Hasidic idea. The Baal Shem Tov says that in each word there are worlds and souls and angels. Well, that was so true to me when I read it, because I already had a practice where I will conjure up the word and allow the hidden meanings to address me without thinking about them, but as or allow them to enter me and enter into my soul, and then see what happens next. There's the Husserl's idea of bracketing. I don't know what the word means until my soul tells me, and my soul can only tell me if I allow the word to enter. So from the Baal Shem Tov's perspective, the worlds, the olamot, Melachim, the world, nefashot, the world, souls, and angels that are actually embedded in the world, in the word. Um, when we have a certain consciousness, the consciousness of shining a light into the word, and then the hidden depths of the word then appear. So when I say nishama, again, I don't want to have to define it for me, but some sense of the divine has breathed of the divine essence into me. I carry some of the divine essence. Just sit with that. The divine has breathed some of the divine essence into me. Now, it says neshama shenatatabi. Now, the usual Hebrew word for placed is lasim. So it would be Elohai neshama shesamtabi. It doesn't work musically. So whoever wrote it, the word natata, which functions as a synonym of samta. Natata is more give, samta is place, but somewhat interchangeable. So the poet, said, I like the rhythm of Elohai neshama shenatatabi as samtabi, which ends a bit abruptly. So, well, there's a poet at work here. Elohai neshama shenatatabi. Ata brata. Now, if you look at the Hebrew, the brata it contains the words barata ota. So the ota is now put at the end of the word barata. It was called a hey mapik, a hey, which stands for ota, it. You've created it with a dagesh in it to show you there's a word missing. But now what happens is, if I were to pronounce it carefully, instead of ata barata ota, you created it or her. Ata barata, but the ota is now replaced by the letter hey, the H sound, but with a dagesh in it. So you're supposed to say ata brata, ata yatsarta. Now, there's the breathing. What a brilliant poet. Took the idea of neshama, which is breathing, took the word barata, which means you created, ota, you created it, took out the ota, in the abbreviated form, the hey mapik, the hey with the dot in, where if you say it carefully, you have to enunciate the atabrata, atayirsata. Okay. So again, studying it, this is just the the philology, I mean the shape of the word. Again, another piece of brilliance. Now, atabara. What does the word bara mean? Well, it's used in the beginning of the Genesis story to create the world. I looked up the word bara throughout the Bible, and it shows how, all the phenomena that the divine, as it were, bore olam, bore, creating the heavens and the earth, and then the soul you created me, atabrata, that my soul is one of the things that God creates. But it says, neshama shenatatabi, the soul that you placed within me. So I have my unique soul that God created just for me, or a soul that has been created that establishes my identity as a human being. So who I am is a function of divine will. Ata brata, you created my neshama. Then ata yitzarta, you shaped it. Again, just sinking the idea that my soul has a shape. And it was, as it were, handcrafted, as it were, by the divine. The divine created my soul and shaped my soul. Ata brata, ata yirsata, ata nafachtabi, and you, as it were, exhaled it into me. So Adonai, Elohai, neshama shenata Elohai, the soul that you place within me is pure. Ata brata, ata yitzarta, vata nafachtabi. Just that phrase there, which is part of my daily practice. Throughout the prayer book, I have a minimum practice that I have, and that is always a piece of it. Now, look, I've suspended whether I believe in God or not. I've suspended whether I believe in the soul or not. I've not tried to think too deeply about the idea of God creating and shaping, whatever shaping a soul means. I took all of that, the lens of suspension, and just bracketed all these words. I don't know what they mean until I encounter what they mean. And then in the encountering them, something happens inside of me, something forms inside of me, something is created in me, something takes shape in me, but not as an act of will. I'm not, as it were, thinking these things, they happen to me. Now, I want to compare that to the religion I grew up with, which was you go to synagogue and the rabbi says this and we respond this and we recite things, the cantor sings a song, the rabbi gives a sermon, good job, go home. And in the Hasidic tradition, I'm encountering a language that my soul ingest and meaning is created. And once I learned the Hasidic path toward prayer, I would go to a synagogue, and I remember my thing was pick two words, pick two sentences. While the davening is going on, I pick my word, my phrase, my verse, and I sit with it for 40 minutes or an hour, and I meditated, and I opened my eyes, and I said, "Well, I'm still here." I floated on to another place, and I'm looking at the other people's, and wondering, did anybody else have this experience? Did anybody else use a word of the prayer book to go in and experience the miracle of understanding and meaning taking shape? Certainly, when I would go through these things, I was alerted to the fact that I do have a neshama, and other people have neshamas. And you know, where are the people that are using the Siddur to go into the deepest regions of our being and having meaning shaped and brought forward? There's no theology. It's actually a theory of language. It's a theory of consciousness. It's a theory of the soul. And that's when I became convinced. I'm kind of indifferent to theology. You believe this, believe that. Okay, as long as it doesn't teach violence or hatred, I'm good. But rather using this to as a way for my soul to develop. Now, when you memorize enough of these phrases, when you do this enough, that's a fabric of what I would call faith takes shape. But it's not faith in propositions, but a sense that my soul, my inner life is devoted to something. There's a kind of a consciousness, a mode of being that is shaped, that I hope to share with others and truly share with others, being finding other people of soul and talking about this world. Where for me, this is Hasidic, but you can say it's, you know, um, I think, oh, by the way, it's interesting as I retrace my steps this week, they're all German Protestants, Wilhelm Dilthey, um, uh, 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 um, hold on a second, Rudolf Bultmann, Heidegger. I say it with a little bit of sorrow because I think there's a moral failure. Paul Tillich. I had the other ones that I read, Paul Ricoeur. They're all continental philosophers working in the same kind of mode. I go to Hans-Urs Gadamer, ultimately Jürgen Habermas, who's my favorite now, at the end of all of this. Um, but for me, tracing this journey from, by the way, I was studying Wilhelm Dilthey this week. Just a quick word about it. I don't want to be obscure. He's the one who created the kind of study of history is we're not studying cold facts about what happened. We're studying the inner lives of other people operating in time. And when you study history, you're studying modes of consciousness that created lives. So history was not the study of cold facts. It was the study of what he would call sitz in Leben, where they were situated in life, what life meant to them, what the cultural artifacts, not as something of cold research calculation, but expressions of soul, expressions of the inner life. So, if when people say, "Oh, Dilthey was the creator of the modern study of history," he's so much more than that. If you really want to have a deep experience, look up Dilthey, Dilthey, Wilhelm Dilthey. He's a deep humanist. He's a conscious, soulful man who is trying to teach people how to read history, not what you think it is. And I'm thinking when I was, studying history in high school, what if the teacher would have said, Marbury versus Madison. Let's talk about the crisis in the souls of human beings that brought our country to a point where things were falling apart. And these people learned in the law said, we have to decide, we have to do something here. We have to change the nature of how we understand our Constitution. Um, the Constitution was kind of silent on certain things, and the Supreme Court asserted itself and says, here's what it's like. Here's how we're going to decide things. It was never presented to me as an adventure, as a thriller, but rather you just need to know this term and what it's for on the exam. So So studying dill types certainly helped me, uh, understand how to look at history. Then I go to the others for convenience sake, I'll say Bultmann and Paul Tillich and others, and and then how much the Protestant search toward meaning reflected what I'll call the axioms of Hasidism. Now, I don't know if they studied Hasidism. I don't know if they, by the way, they're at a certain point they were all in Marburg and Freiburg. They're all in two cities. Martin Buber was there. Franz Rosenzweig were there. Did they corner Martin Buber and say, "Hey, what's this Hasidic thing?" Right? And did Martin Buber say to them, "Look, let me tell you what's up here." And Bultmann said, "Oh my God, I'm going to write this up in a Protestant key." There was so much going. Gershom Scholem was already publishing on the Kabbalah. I have a book in a box in my container of Heidegger and the Kabbalah. It's a thick book where a person has adduced enormous evidence that Heidegger, who studied with theologians and studied with religious people, was profoundly influenced by the Kabbalah. I can't wait to read the book. It's sitting in a carton unread. Now, for me to think about that Buber and Heidegger and Rosenzweig, they were all in the same place at the same time, and they were all going through something deep. And now, no one's heard of them. No one talks about them anymore. Like here in Israel, are you religious or are you secular? I think to myself, what a silly question that has us avoid the deepest things of life. It doesn't matter whether you're Dati or Chiloni. What matters is, are you encountering depth? Are you encountering, are you being transformed? That's what matters. I meet Dati'im religious people that are as shallow and as boring as the day is long. And then I meet Chiloni, so-called secular, who have the deepest spiritual, religious sensibilities, but they don't observe mitzvot. So the idea of whether you observe the mitzvot or not is, in a way, the most meaningless question for me. The question for me is, how deep does your soul operate, and are you aware of it? Let's forget about this Dati Chiloni thing. In fact, I think I shared with you that one of the most wonderful phrases I heard was a person who was non-Orthodox, not Dati, who said, "I don't want to be called Chiloni," which is secular, from the word chol, which literally is sand, but means mundane. So Chiloni literally means mundane. There's Yom Kadosh, like Shabbat and holidays, and there's Yom Chiloni, the mundane days, which is not a sacred day. Now, the Hebrew word chalom, which means window, and apparently windows used to be made out of sand. So the word chiloni from sand, which came to mean mundane, and the word chalom, which is also from the word sand. She said, "An chiloni, ani chaloni." What is a chaloni? I believe in a window. I'm a window person, right? I'm not looking at a wall. She says, if you're chiloni, you're looking at a wall. If you're dati, you're looking at a wall. What if we opened up a window? Isn't this a great way to look at phenomenology? I want to experience things as they are and not a picture on the wall of how I've decided how things are. So she said, Ani chaloni. I'm a window person. And there are chilonim who are chaloni, and there are datiim who are chaloni. The question is not what the window on your wall is, what the picture on the wall is. Get rid of that. Open the window. We can see each other. We can see truth. We can see soul. We can see being. Is a perfect. Now, I have to ask her now that I'm thinking about it. Has she studied the Baal Shem Tov? Because the Baal Shem Tov says, you see that word there? Put a window and look inside the word and peer in the word and have the word reach out to you. I'm almost positive the person has, now that I'm thinking about it, has read the Baal Shem Tov. So in my second installment of something that's brewing inside of me that I want to share with you, I want to take these words, phenomenology, which means experiencing things in their authentic depth without a lens protecting you from it. For example, I don't believe in the prayer book. I don't believe in prayer. I don't think prayer works. I think to myself, so that's why you won't study Elohai Neshama Shinatat Torah. That's why you won't even look at it. Why you won't look at this poem and allow it to jump out and jump into your soul and awaken you because you have some lens that says I don't like the prayer book. I mean, I think to myself, what unsound shallowness. Now, I don't blame the person because they were never taught. No one ever said, let's take a minute, sit down, open this book, let me translate it for you. Now meditate on it. Allow it to sit inside of you. allow it to work its, its magic within you. And the person says, "Well, is this what you mean by pray?" I said, "That's exactly what I mean by pray. I don't sit and say, 'Oh Lord, give me a green bicycle.' No, that's not what I mean by pray. For me, pray means encounter my soul and the soul of the universe through the medium of language. That's what I mean. That's why I don't like to use the word pray or prayer book, because that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an encounter. So look how many generations of Jews went to services completely bored, don't believe anything they're reading, and went off somewhere else. And all it took, from my perspective, is rabbis who knew how to teach the Hasidic path to prayer, which was also the path that Protestantism took, up until Paul Tillich. In a way, it was kind of forgotten. No one studies these people anymore, as far as I know. So this is phenomenology, as it were, the encounter of things, especially through language. That's the Heidegger's contribution to this. Is we're inside of language, so let's take language seriously. Let's examine words. The thing is, how do you think about things, while you're thinking? So that's why he had to write a book called "What is Thinking." It's an interesting thing to pull back from thinking so far that you can use a kind of a non-verbal thinking to think about thought and think about words. So this is where I'm at now. I hope you're enjoying the journey, and I'll share more next week.